The 132nd edition of the Roy's Boys podcast starts right now.
Carolina basketball family is the strongest there's ever been. There ever will be.
Eight up free hand, King likes the ball. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Good! Off the glass! Oklahoma calls timeout, but the game is over! The game is over! Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma! Been ready on his second attempt. That one is no good! They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores!
With 20 seconds left to play, goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good! 63, 62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Brent Brown looking. Throw away to Worthy. 35. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship. Carolina with foul. He takes the timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul.
Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebound. It's over. And how about the Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
The Tar Heels are the national daggum champions.
And that's what it takes when you big time games. You got to compete. You do it with your brain, and you got to do it with your heart too. And that's pretty doggone good.
From QCBroadcasting.com, this is the Roy's Boys podcast with your host, Josh Marlowe. Hey everybody, welcome you into another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. And even though the sports world is kind of slow right now, we got some more news today regarding Carolina basketball, as Cole Anthony announced that he is foregoing his remaining eligibility as a Tar Heel and will enter 2020 NBA draft. And Anthony, this is a decision that I think we've all expected really since Cole committed to Carolina a spring ago, and now we finally got some clarity on his future moving forward.
Well, I would like to correct you. It is a slow time in the sports world as a whole. In terms of the Carolina sports world, today was one of the busiest days that we've seen in a long time because there was a lot of football news, but it all started with a huge announcement, as you said, from Cole Anthony. And I'm not really too shocked. I know that you had sort of started coming around on the idea that he was coming back. I had let it sort of enter my mind a little bit, but at the same time, I think we both kind of knew that there was still a really good chance that he was going to end up leaving. And he ends up going to the NBA, which I think is ultimately the right choice. I know that a lot of people have really read heavily into the latest ESPN mock draft that had him falling outside of the lottery. But I know, as you said, when you were going and writing the article going through the mock drafts, there are a lot of mock drafts that still have him going in the lottery. And I think that that's still probably a correct assumption. I told you that when we were talking about Garrison Brooks coming back and we mentioned Cole Anthony, that what's going to happen with Cole is that a team is going to fall in love with him during the process and they'll end up taking him. I think that the New York Knicks and the Washington Wizards are probably your two teams to keep an eye on. I still think that there are some other teams that could definitely come into play. But this ultimately still feels like a guy that's going to be a lottery pick. And for that reason, it makes a lot of sense why he made this decision today as opposed to coming back next year in a class that could end up being a better overall class than this one, especially at the top. So I think ultimately it's a decision that makes a lot of sense for Cole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same way, too, is that you know, Roy Williams has a lot of connections into the NBA. His dad, of course, that being Greg Anthony, still has a lot of active connections in the NBA world. Probably has a clear understanding of where he's going to go in the 2020 NBA draft whenever that takes place. And ultimately, how are you going to tell an 18, 19-year-old kid to turn down guaranteed millions? You set up your future, your family's future, etc., although he doesn't need the money, it's still hard to say no to the money. Where in college, you're basically playing for free. You get a scholarship, but you're not making any money on and off the court like you could be and honestly should be. And you bring up the Knicks being the team that mocked a lot, and that's the most frequent team that he's mocked to. He is, of course, from New York, so you probably, if he's got good intel saying that the Knicks are going to take him, all kids want to play for that hometown team, especially the one being the Knicks. If he could be the guy that returns that prominent franchise or former prominent franchise back to relevance. Of course, you and I are both big-time Knicks fans. We'd love to see that ourselves. It's hard to say no to that. And the biggest thing you brought up, his upside as a prospect, you look at his numbers. He averaged 18.5 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, 4 assists. Shot 38% from the field, 35% from three. You'd want to see his field goal percentage be in the mid to high 40s, but you look at those numbers, 18 points, 5 boards, 5 dimes, and you're talking about a guy that still has a lot of tremendous upside. You're exactly right. Some team is going to fall in love with him because if you can average that and you're still being told you haven't reached your potential as a player, I'd probably, that's going to make it easier for you to go to the NBA draft a lot easier. Whereas Garrison Brooks had a breakout year, became a player that we honestly never thought we'd see as a Tar Heel, and still didn't find himself on any draft board. And so I think, I had come to the decision or the conclusion that if he returned, I could see it because he had announced his decision to delay his decision with the coronavirus, but I think that was just him trying to show his maturity as a person. Of course, earlier in the week, he was out at a hospital handing out masks and stuff like that, so he took some time away to still help all the people in need during this unprecedented time, and we commend him for that. But I think ultimately this was a decision that we knew well when he committed, and it now gives Carolina back-to-back one-and-dones at the point guard's position. And so Roy Williams is kind of entering uncharted territory because he's never had consecutive point guards leave in his now 17 years at Chapel Hill.
Well, the good news is that he does have a guy coming in Caleb Love, who's another 5-star. Unfortunately, looks like Caleb, barring something shocking, will probably be in the same boat. Now, to be fair, Kobe was not supposed to be that guy. Kobe was supposed to be a 2-year guy at least, but just really kind of overshot expectations. One other thing that I wanted to bring up with this poll that I think is interesting about his decision to go to the NBA. I wonder if this wasn't going on, if there would have been maybe some hesitance and maybe some thought about coming back. The reason I say that is because you've got to look at everything that's going on with this situation right now. And we've already heard college football talk about the potential that they might have to push the season back. We don't know if this is going to have an effect on college basketball. We don't know. I mean, in the least, it probably would have some effect in the fact that you're not going to be able to go through as much preseason stuff as you normally would. You won't be able to have as vigorous of off-season workouts as you maybe would. And maybe that factored into Cole's decision because if you didn't have this going on, you were going to go through a full off-season where you get to learn the Tar Heel offense a little bit more and come back with a team that could potentially, be in the running, one of the favorites to win the ACC next year. I know that's maybe a little far-fetched considering that they're coming off a season where they went 14-19 and finished last in the regular season standings. But I think that maybe the decision would have been a little bit different. With so much uncertainty, you have to think that this could go. I mean, these restrictions could go all the way up until a couple of weeks before the season's supposed to start. Could even delay the start of the season if it goes on long enough. In Cole Anthony's sense, would that really make a whole lot of sense to come back? Because how much are you actually going to be able to improve? Because you're not going to be able to go through and learn the offense at the level you would in a normal season. You're not, you're not going to be able to really work on your game that much. Yeah, you can go and maybe work on your game in your driveway, which Cole Anthony's driveway is probably better than any driveway that we've ever played basketball in. But at the same time, it's still not the same. So I wonder if maybe that was part of the reason that he just said, you know what, I'm going to go to the NBA. My draft stock probably isn't going to get much better because the NBA is a league that, as we've seen the last couple of years, they really value youth because they like the raw guys that they can really mold into the type of players they want. So I think that may have played a factor into it. But with him leaving, I'm not really overly concerned because, as you talked about, or with Caleb Love coming in, as well as you bring back Jeremiah Francis, you would think. I would assume by that time his knee will probably be in good shape. Anthony Harris is a little more of a question mark. You still got a point guard position that, as of right now, you feel pretty confident about. Actually, maybe even a little more confident than you felt heading into last season because of the fact that you've got guys that have played a little bit more. Jeremiah Francis has a little bit of experience. Anthony Harris has a little bit of experience. We've seen what Leaky Black can do at point guard. So Cole leaving is something you hate to lose a talented player like that, but at the same time, I'm not really overly.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think, we've been prepared for really since he committed. Number 2 prospect coming out of high school. It was a foregone conclusion. Unless something really bad happened, he was going to come play 1 year in Chapel Hill and take his talents onto the NBA. And you kind of took the conversation where I was really wanting to hammer or focus on this edition of the podcast, which is what is the state of the point guard position. As I mentioned, Roy Williams has never lost back-to-back point guards consecutively. That's now happened with Kobe White departing, and now you've lost Cole Anthony. In years past, whenever you were going through a transition, it was from Raymond Felton to Bobby Frazier to Ty Lawson. And then it was from Ty Lawson to Larry Drew to Kendall Marshall. And then Kendall Marshall to Marcus Page to Joel Berry. And then from Barry to Kobe White. And for the most part, all those transitions were rather seamless. But we kind of saw this year, even before Cole Anthony got hurt, he didn't pick up the college game like we kind of thought he would with all the stuff we heard coming out of him out of high school. And Roy Williams often mentioned him as being the most talented point guard he'd ever coached. We weren't seeing the results on that early on the court. Well, now, once again, you're going to have to break in another point guard. You brought up that you've got Jeremiah Francis and Anthony Harris on the roster, and both have ran your offense, but both suffered knee injuries. Anthony Harris tore his ACL in the Yale game. Jeremiah Francis was at the point he could not play back-to-backs because his knees couldn't handle it. Now, they both have a legitimate excuse because their health hindered them from becoming big parts of this year's team because, quite frankly, they weren't supposed to be a big part of this year's team. So you've got worries about that. And then Caleb Love, you're back in the same boat you were with Cole Anthony. Yeah, he comes in with a lot of talent, and he dominated in high school, but that's high school. That's AAU ball. You're now going to Carolina. You're now playing for Roy Williams. They run a pro-style offense in some sorts with kind of some of their offensive sets. You're in the ACC, which most years is the toughest conference in college basketball. You're going to play one of the toughest non-conference schedules in the year. How concerned are you about this Carolina offense, which starts with the point guard position?
I'm trying to sort of stay positive in terms of the knee injury stuff. I mean, I think Anthony Harris is going to be more limited. I think Francis will be in a little bit of a better spot, mainly because he's going to have a whole off season to work on recovery again, getting that knee a little bit stronger. And that's the big thing for Francis is that he did not suffer another knee injury. That was the thing that we were kind of getting worried about late in the year and why he really couldn't play a whole bunch of minutes because if for some reason he did end up re-injuring it, that could have probably been the end of his career. So the good news is he should be back. I don't know if he'll be exactly 100%. Just because we don't know if they're going to be able to go through the full
off-season program?
The off-season recovery program. That's what I'm looking for. Going through that at home by yourself is different than being in person and being able to work with the trainers one-on-one while you're on campus. And again, eventually over the summer, maybe they get these guys back on campus. maybe I'm wrong and he's able to go through the full rehab the way he wants to. So that could be huge. Anthony Harris, I mean, we just don't really know a whole lot right now. We